The moving truck had barely pulled away when 8-year-old Tommy Peterson pointed at the towering figure across the fence and whispered, "Mom, is that a giant?" Claire Peterson followed her son's gaze to see a man who had to be at least 6'8", wearing a weathered cowboy hat that made him look even taller against the endless Montana sky. What happened next would change everything she thought she knew about second chances. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Claire Peterson had never imagined she'd be starting over at 32 with 4 children in tow. But life had a way of rewriting plans without asking permission. The small rental house in Millbrook, Montana, wasn't much to look at: peeling paint, a sagging front porch, and windows that rattled when the wind picked up, but it was theirs, and after everything they'd been through, that meant everything. Divorce had been finalized 6 months ago, and Claire still felt the sting of Derek's parting words. Good luck finding someone who wants to take on this circus. He'd walked away from their marriage as easily as discarding yesterday's newspaper, leaving behind not just Claire, but Tommy, who was 8 and still asked when Daddy was coming home. 12-year-old Sarah, who'd built walls around her heart, thicker than fortress stones. 14-year-old Marcus, whose anger seemed to simmer just beneath the surface. And little Emma, barely 5, who still slept with the stuffed elephant Derek had given her before he decided fatherhood was too much responsibility. The move from Denver to Millbrook hadn't been Claire's first choice, but her teaching credentials transferred. The elementary school needed a 3rd-grade teacher, and the cost of living was a fraction of what they'd faced in the city. More importantly, it was a place where they could disappear from the whispers and pitying looks that had followed them after Derek's very public affair with his secretary became the talk of their neighborhood. Claire had spent the first week unpacking boxes and trying to create some semblance of home in the cramped 3-bedroom house. The kids were struggling with the transition. Emma cried every night for her old room. Marcus had barely spoken since they'd arrived. Sarah spent most of her time with headphones on, and Tommy seemed determined to explore every inch of their new surroundings, which worried Claire more than she cared to admit. It was on a Tuesday morning, while Claire was hanging laundry on the line she'd strung between 2 fence posts, that she first really noticed their neighbor. She'd caught glimpses of him before, a towering figure moving around the massive ranch that bordered their small property. But this was the first time she'd seen him up close. He was mending a section of fence that separated their properties, and Claire couldn't help but stare. The man was enormous, not just tall but broad-shouldered and solid, with hands that looked like they could palm a basketball with room to spare. His dark hair was streaked with early silver, and when he turned slightly, she caught sight of a face that was ruggedly handsome despite what looked like a scar running from his left temple down to his jaw. Claire quickly looked away when she realized she was staring, focusing intently on pinning Emma's tiny dresses to the line. But she could hear him working, the steady rhythm of his hammer, the occasional creak of the wooden fence posts. There was something oddly comforting about the sound, like having a strong presence nearby. "Mom, can I go pet the horses?" Tommy's voice made her jump. He'd appeared beside her, his eyes fixed on the pasture beyond the fence where several beautiful horses grazed in the morning sun. "Absolutely not," Claire said quickly. "Those aren't our horses, Tommy. We don't go onto other people's property without permission." "But they're so pretty," Tommy said wistfully. "And that one there, the brown one with the white face, keeps looking at me like he wants to be friends." Claire glanced over and saw that the enormous man had stopped working and was watching them. Even from 50 feet away, she could feel the weight of his gaze, and it made her self-conscious about her faded jeans and the old Denver Broncos t-shirt she'd thrown on that morning. "Tommy, inside," she said, gathering the empty laundry basket. "We need to get ready for school." But Tommy, with the fearlessness that only 8-year-olds possess, had already wandered closer to the fence. "Mister, what's that horse's name?" he called out, Claire felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "Tommy, get back here right now," she said. But the damage was done. The giant man was walking toward them, each step covering ground that would take Claire 2 strides to match. Up close, he was even more imposing. Claire found herself having to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, which she discovered were a surprising shade of green, like pine needles in summer sunlight. The scar she'd noticed was more pronounced up close, but rather than making him look menacing, it somehow added character to his face. "That's buckwheat," he said to Tommy, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate in Claire's chest. "He's a paint horse, about 12 years old. Good eye, he is a friendly one." Tommy's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Buckwheat? That's a funny name for a horse. Why'd you name him that?" The man's mouth quirked into what might have been the beginning of a smile. "When I got him as a colt, he had these spots that reminded me of buckwheat pancakes my grandmother used to make. The name just stuck." "I love pancakes," Tommy said seriously. "Mom makes really good ones, but she's been too busy unpacking to make any since we moved here." Claire wanted to disappear into the ground. "Tommy, that's enough," she said, reaching for his hand. "We need to go inside." But the man was looking at her now, and something in his expression made her pause. It wasn't the look she'd grown accustomed to since the divorce, not pity or calculation or the uncomfortable awareness that she was now a single mother. It was simply interested. "You're the new teacher," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, I'm Claire Peterson. 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary." She felt compelled to add, "And these are my children. Well, one of them. The others are getting ready for school." "Jake Morrison," he said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture that seemed old-fashioned but natural. "I own the Double M Ranch here. Welcome to Millbrook." There was an awkward pause where Claire wasn't sure what to say next. In Denver, neighbors were polite but distant. You might exchange pleasantries over the fence, but you didn't really get to know each other. This felt different, more personal somehow. "Can I pet Buckwheat?" Tommy asked again, apparently immune to social awkwardness. Jake looked at Claire. "If your mom says it's okay, you can come over after school. Buckwheat loves attention, and I've got some other gentle horses that might like to meet you." Claire's instinct was to say no. They'd just arrived. She didn't know anything about this man except that he was enormous and owned horses, and she'd learned to be cautious about men who seemed too good to be true. But Tommy was looking at her with such hope, and it had been so long since she'd seen him excited about anything. "I don't know," she said carefully. "We're still settling in, and I need to talk to the other children about boundaries and—" "Mom, please?" Tommy interrupted. "I promise I'll be good. I'll do all my homework first and clean my room and everything." Jake was watching this exchange with an expression Claire couldn't quite read. "No pressure," he said quietly. "The offer stands whenever you're comfortable with it. Horses are good for kids. They teach responsibility, patience, trust." The way he said the word trust made something flutter in Claire's chest, though she couldn't say why. "Maybe," she said. "We'll see." "Fair enough," Jake said. He looked at Tommy again. "You take care of your mom, okay? Moving to a new place can be tough." Tommy nodded solemnly. "I'm the man of the house now," he said, puffing out his chest. "That's what my dad said before he before he went away." Claire felt her face flush hot with embarrassment. She didn't need this stranger knowing about her failed marriage, didn't need him drawing conclusions about why an 8-year-old thought he needed to be the man of anything. But Jake just nodded seriously at Tommy. "That's a big responsibility. But remember, being the man of the house doesn't mean you have to carry everything by yourself. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let other people help." Something in his tone made Claire look at him sharply. There was a weight to his words that suggested he knew something about carrying responsibilities that were too heavy for one person. "Tommy, we really do need to get ready for school," she said. and this time Tommy didn't argue. "Nice meeting you, Mr. Morrison," Tommy said politely. "Just Jake," the big man said. "Mr. Morrison was my father." As they walked back toward the house, Claire could feel Jake's eyes on them. She told herself it was just neighborly interest, but something about the way he'd looked at her, not just at her, but at Tommy too, like he was seeing something worth paying attention to, made her pulse quicken in a way it hadn't since before. Her marriage fell apart. Inside the house, chaos reigned. Sarah was frantically searching for her science textbook. Marcus was arguing with Emma about whose turn it was to use the bathroom, and the coffee maker was beeping insistently because Claire had forgotten to turn it off. "Mom, who was that giant man?" Emma asked, pressing her face against the kitchen window to peer out at the ranch next door. "Our neighbor, Mr. Morrison. He owns the ranch. Is he nice?" Sarah asked, looking up from her textbook search. "He seemed nice," Claire said carefully. "He invited Tommy to meet his horses after school. Can we all go?" Emma asked excitedly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I don't want to meet any stupid horses," Marcus muttered from the doorway. At 14, he'd decided that anything that might be considered fun was beneath his dignity. "We'll see," Claire said. The same response she'd given Jake. It seemed to be her default answer these days for anything that required decisions she wasn't ready to make. The morning routine continued its familiar chaos: lost homework, forgotten lunch money, the daily negotiation over what constituted appropriate school attire. By the time Claire had dropped the kids off and made it to Millbrook Elementary, she was already running 5 minutes late. The school was smaller than she was used to, with hallways that seemed to echo every footstep and classrooms that still had chalkboards instead of whiteboards. Her third-grade class was a mix of 15 children, some shy, others bold, all curious about their new teacher from the big city. Teaching had always been Claire's refuge. No matter what was happening in her personal life, she could step into a classroom and find purpose. These children needed her to be present, engaged, caring. They needed her to create a space where learning felt safe and exciting. It was a responsibility she'd never taken lightly, and today it felt like a lifeline. The day passed in the familiar rhythm of spelling tests, math problems, and the small dramas that seemed enormous when you were 8 years old. During lunch, Claire ate in her classroom and found herself looking out the window toward the mountains that rose beyond the town. Denver had mountains too, but they'd been distant, something you saw on clear days if you remembered to look up. Here, they felt close enough to touch. Protective somehow. She was grading papers during her planning period when there was a soft knock on her classroom door. Claire looked up to see Jake Morrison filling the doorway, his cowboy hat in his hands, and an expression that seemed almost nervous on his rugged face. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said. "I was in town picking up some supplies and thought I'd stop by." Claire was acutely aware that she looked like she'd been teaching all day. Her hair was escaping from its ponytail. There was chalk dust on her skirt, and she was pretty sure she had a juice stain on her blouse, courtesy of a spill during snack time. "Not at all," she said, setting down her red pen. "Is everything okay?" Fine, Jake said, though he seemed uncomfortable standing in a classroom designed for 8-year-olds, his head nearly touching the ceiling. "I wanted to apologize if I overstepped this morning. Sometimes I forget that not everyone is comfortable around horses, and I shouldn't have assumed." "You didn't overstep," Claire said quickly. Tommy loved meeting buckwheat. He talked about it the whole way to school. Something in Jake's expression relaxed. "Good. I was worried I'd made you uncomfortable." "Not uncomfortable, exactly," Claire said, then wondered why she was being honest with this man she barely knew. "It's just ... We're still figuring out how things work here." In Denver, neighbors were more ... distant. "Millbrook's different," Jake agreed. Takes some getting used to if you're not from a small town. People here tend to look out for each other, but I know that can feel intrusive if you're not expecting. Claire studied his face, trying to read the subtext in his words. Have you lived here long? Born and raised, Jake said. Took over the ranch from my father about 10 years ago. It's been in the Morrison family for 3 generations. That must be nice, Claire said, and meant it. Having that kind of history, that connection to a place. Something flickered across Jake's face, not quite sadness, but something more complex. It has its benefits and its burdens, he said quietly. But yes, I'm grateful for it. There was a pause that felt charged with unspoken things. Claire found herself wondering about those burdens he'd mentioned, about the scar on his face, about why a man who seemed to have everything would spend his afternoon checking on a neighbor he'd just met. About Tommy's visit, Jake said, seeming to shake himself back to the present. If you decide you're comfortable with it, I'd be happy to have all the kids over. I've got a gentle Mare named Honey who loves children, and there's a barn cat that's been looking for someone to spoil him with attention. All 4 of them? Claire asked, surprised. That would be a lot. I like kids, Jake said simply. And honestly, the ranch can feel pretty quiet sometimes. It would be nice to have some life around the place. Claire felt that flutter in her chest again. Men didn't usually volunteer to take on her children. Derek had barely tolerated them toward the end, and the few men she'd encountered since the divorce had made it clear that 4 kids were a deal-breaker before they'd even gotten to know her. I'll think about it, she said. Maybe this weekend? Saturday. Afternoon works well for me, Jake said. Around 2 o'clock? That gives you time for morning routines and lunch. Okay, Claire said, and was surprised by how easy the decision felt once she made it. Saturday at 2. Jake's smile transformed his entire face, erasing years and making him look almost boyish despite his size. Great, I'll make sure Buckwheat and Honey are on their best behavior. After he left, Claire sat in her empty classroom trying to process what had just happened. In the space of 12 hours, she'd met a neighbor, been invited to visit his ranch, and agreed to bring all 4 of her children to meet a man she knew almost nothing about. The old Claire, the married Claire, would never have made such a decision so quickly. But the old Claire had also never been alone, never had to rebuild her life from scratch, never had to look into her children's eyes and figure out how to give them hope when she wasn't sure she had any left herself. Maybe it was time to stop being so careful. Maybe it was time to take Jake Morrison's advice about letting other people help. Saturday suddenly felt both very far away and much too soon. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp, autumn air that made Montana famous, and Claire found herself changing clothes 3 times before settling on dark jeans and a burgundy sweater that didn't make her look completely washed out. She told herself she was dressing appropriately for a ranch visit, but the nervous energy humming through her suggested otherwise. The children's reactions to the planned visit had been predictably mixed. Tommy had spent the week drawing pictures of horses and asking approximately 47 questions per day about what they might do at Jake's ranch. Emma had insisted on wearing her favorite dress with the sunflower pattern, despite Claire's explanations about ranch-appropriate clothing. Sarah had shrugged with practiced teenage indifference, but had been caught researching horse breeds on her phone. Marcus, true to form, had announced he wasn't going and had barricaded himself in the bedroom he shared with Tommy. I don't see why I have to go hang out with some old cowboy and his smelly animals, Marcus said through the door when Claire knocked at 1:30. You don't have to do anything except be polite, Claire replied. And Jake's not old. He's probably my age. So, like ancient, came Marcus's muffled response. Claire counted to 10 before answering. Marcus, you have exactly 5 minutes to come out of that room, or you're going to spend the afternoon doing the laundry I've been putting off all week. The door opened immediately. Marcus appeared in the hallway wearing ripped jeans and a black t-shirt with a band logo that looked vaguely inappropriate, but Claire decided to pick her battles. At least he was coming. The walk across the field that separated their properties took less than 10 minutes, but it felt like stepping into a different world. The Double M Ranch was everything Claire had imagined a Montana ranch would be: sprawling pastures dotted with cattle, split-rail fences that looked like they'd been built to last a century, and in the center of it all, a 2-story log house that belonged on the cover of a magazine. Jake was waiting for them by the main barn, and Claire was struck again by his sheer physical presence. Today he wore a dark green flannel shirt that made his eyes look even more striking, and clean jeans that somehow managed to look both practical and flattering. When he smiled at their approach, Claire felt something warm unfurl in her chest. "Right on time," he said, his gaze taking in all 4 children. "You must be Sarah, Marcus, and Emma. Tommy told me all about you yesterday when he came over to help me feed the chickens." Claire blinked. "He what?" Tommy looked up at her with an expression of perfect innocence. "I was just saying hi to Buckwheat after school, and Mr. Jake was feeding the chickens, and he said I could help if it was okay with you. And since you weren't here to ask," Jake said smoothly, "I figured 20 minutes of chicken feeding wouldn't hurt anything. Tommy's got good instincts with animals." Claire opened her mouth to scold Tommy for going somewhere without permission, then closed it again. In Denver, she would have been horrified. Here, with Jake's calm presence and Tommy's obvious pride in having been helpful, it seemed less like rule-breaking and more like ... community. "Next time, check with me first," she said to Tommy, but without much heat. "Yes, ma'am," Tommy said solemnly. Emma had been staring up at Jake with wide eyes. "Are you really a giant?" she asked with 5-year-old directness. Jake crouched down to her level, which still left him taller than she was. "Not a giant, just a tall cowboy. Are you really a princess? Because that's a very beautiful dress." Emma giggled and spun in a circle, making her sunflower skirt flare out. "It's my favorite. Mommy said I couldn't wear it to see horses, but I told her princesses can do anything." "Your mommy's right that princess dresses in horse stables don't always mix," Jake said seriously. "But I happen to have a spare jacket that might help protect such a fancy dress. Would that be okay?" Emma nodded enthusiastically, and Jake straightened up to retrieve a child-sized denim jacket from a hook inside the barn door. It was clearly well used but clean, and when he helped Emma into it, she looked like a tiny ranch hand. "Where did that come from?" Claire asked quietly. Something flickered across Jake's face. "Sometimes the ranch hands bring their kids around. I like to keep a few things on hand." There was a story there, Claire realized, but before she could pursue it, Jake was addressing Marcus. "I heard you're not much of a horse person," Jake said. "That's fine, not everyone is. But I've got a 1967 Mustang in the garage that I've been restoring. If you'd rather check that out while the others meet the horses, you're welcome to." Marcus, who had been radiating sullen teenager energy, looked up with genuine interest. "A 67 Mustang? What engine?" 390 V8. She's been sitting in pieces for about 5 years, but I finally started putting her back together last winter. "That's actually pretty cool," Marcus admitted, his entire demeanor shifting. Claire watched in amazement as Jake somehow managed to find exactly the right approach for each of her children. With Tommy, he was patient and educational. With Emma, he was gently playful. With Sarah, who had been hanging back uncertainly, he simply included her without making a big deal of it. And with Marcus, he'd found common ground that didn't involve horses or anything else Marcus had predetermined to dislike. They started with Buckwheat, who was indeed as gentle and friendly as Jake had promised. Tommy was fearless immediately, wanting to pet the horse's nose and ask about everything from what horses ate to why their tails were so long. Emma was more cautious but clearly enchanted. especially when Buckwheat lowered his head to investigate her jacket, and she dissolved into giggles. Sarah surprised everyone by being naturally good with the horses. She had quiet hands and an intuitive sense of how to move around the large animals without spooking them. When Jake mentioned this, she blushed prettily and admitted she'd always wanted to learn to ride, but had never had the opportunity. "We'll have to fix that," Jake said casually, and Claire's heart did a little skip at the assumption that there would be future visits. Marcus had disappeared into the garage with Jake's permission to look at the Mustang, and from the occasional exclamations floating through the open door, he was having a better time than he'd expected. Honey, the mare Jake had mentioned, was everything he'd promised a sweet-tempered chestnut with a white star on her forehead who seemed to genuinely enjoy the attention from the children. Jake explained that she was getting older and was mostly retired from ranch work now, content to serve as a companion horse for the others. "She's beautiful," Claire said, running her hand along Honey's neck. "How old is she?" 22, Jake said. "I got her when she was 3. She's been my favorite riding horse for most of that time." "That's older than me," Tommy exclaimed. "Horses can live into their 30s if they're well cared for," Jake explained. "Honey's got a lot of good years left." As the afternoon progressed, Claire found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months. The children were happy and engaged. The Montana sunshine was warm on her shoulders, and Jake moved through it all with an easy competence that was both impressive and oddly comforting. She was watching Emma feed carrots to Buckwheat when Jake appeared beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something woodsy and subtle that suited him perfectly. "They're good kids," he said quietly. "You should be proud." "Even Marcus?" Claire asked with a rueful smile. "Especially Marcus. He's got a lot of anger, but underneath that, he's got a good heart. He spent 20 minutes there explaining to me why the original engine configuration was better than what most people do. When they restore those cars, kid knows his stuff." Claire felt a familiar pang of guilt. "He's been struggling since the divorce. I keep thinking I should be doing more, but I don't know what. Everything I try just seems to make him angrier." Sometimes the best thing you can do for an angry teenager is give them something they can be good at and let them know you trust them with responsibility, Jake said. "If you're comfortable with it, I could use some help working on the Mustang." "I'd pay him fair wages for real work." Claire stared at him. "You'd hire my 14-year-old son to help you with your car?" "I'd hire a smart kid who knows engines to help me with a restoration project," Jake corrected. "There's a difference." "I don't know what to say," Claire said honestly. "That's incredibly generous. It's practical," Jake said. "I need the help, and he needs something to channel all that energy into. Besides, it would give him a reason to come around here that has nothing to do with his mom making him socialize with the neighbors." There was something in his tone that made Claire look at him more closely. "You really understand teenage boys." "I was one once, a pretty angry one, as it happens." Jake's hand moved unconsciously to the scar on his face. "Sometimes what we need most is for an adult to treat us like we're capable of more than everyone else thinks we are." Before Claire could ask about the story behind that scar, Emma came running over with dirt-streaked hands and a huge smile. "Mommy, can we get a horse, please? I promise I'll take really good care of it and brush it every day and give it carrots and everything." "Horses are a lot of responsibility, sweetheart," Claire said. "And we don't have anywhere to keep one. They could live here with Jake's horses." Emma said as if this was the most obvious solution in the world. "Right, Jake. You have lots of room." Jake's eyes met Claire's over Emma's head, and she saw something there that made her breath catch, not amusement at a child's innocent suggestion, but something deeper and more complicated. "Your mom's right about horses being a big responsibility," Jake said diplomatically. "But you're always welcome to come visit these horses whenever you want." "Every day?" Emma asked hopefully. "Emma," Claire said, but Jake held up a hand. "How about we start with weekends and see how it goes?" he said. That way you can learn everything there is to know about taking care of horses before you decide if you really want one of your own someday." It was a perfect compromise, acknowledging Emma's enthusiasm while giving Claire room to set boundaries. Claire found herself wondering if Jake had children of his own somewhere, because he seemed to have an instinctive understanding of how to navigate parental minefields. The afternoon stretched longer than Claire had planned. Sarah asked shyly if she could try sitting on Honey, and Jake spent 30 minutes showing her basic seat and posture while leading the gentle Mare around the paddock. Tommy discovered the barn cat Jake had mentioned, an enormous orange tabby named Rusty, who immediately claimed Tommy as his personal human. Even Marcus emerged from the garage looking more relaxed than Claire had seen him in weeks. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Claire realized they'd been there for nearly 4 hours. The children showed no signs of wanting to leave, and if she was honest with herself, neither did she. "We should probably head home," she said reluctantly. "It's almost dinner time, and you've been more than generous with your time." "Stay for dinner," Jake said immediately. "I've got a pot roast that's been slow cooking all day, and there's more than enough for everyone." Claire's automatic response was to decline. She couldn't impose on his hospitality any more than she already had. But Tommy looked at her with such hopeful eyes, and Emma was making friends with a second barn cat that had appeared. And Marcus was actually smiling as he told Sarah about the car engine he'd been examining. "I couldn't ask you to feed all of us," she said weakly. "You didn't ask, I offered." Jake's smile was warm and genuine. "Besides, I don't get much company out here. It would be my pleasure." The house was as impressive inside as it was from the outside. High ceilings with exposed beams, a stone fireplace that dominated one wall, and furniture that looked both rustic and comfortable. It was clearly a bachelor's home, but it was clean and well-maintained, with touches that spoke of permanence and pride. Dinner was a revelation. The pot roast was tender enough to cut with a fork, the vegetables were perfectly seasoned, and Jake had somehow managed to produce homemade rolls that were still warm from the oven. "You cook like this regularly?" Claire asked, trying not to sound as impressed as she felt. "When you live alone, you learn to take care of yourself," Jake said. "Besides, my grandmother made sure I knew my way around the kitchen before she'd let me take over the ranch. Said she wasn't going to be responsible for me starving to death just because I was too proud to learn what she called life skills." "Smart grandmother," Claire said. "The smartest woman I ever knew." There was deep affection in Jake's voice. "She raised me after my parents died. Taught me everything I know about ranching, cooking, and how to treat people with respect." "How old were you?" Claire asked gently. 12. Jake's expression grew distant. "Car accident." Grandmother Morrison stepped in without question, even though she was already in her 60s and had raised her own kids decades earlier. Claire felt her heart contract with sympathy. 12 was so young to lose everything, younger than Sarah was now. It explained something about Jake's easy way with her children, his instinctive understanding of how to connect with them. He knew what it was like to have your world turned upside down. The conversation flowed easily around the dinner table. Tommy told everyone about his new school and his teacher, Mrs. Henderson, who apparently had a pet hamster named Einstein. Emma described in elaborate detail the game she'd invented involving the barn cats and a ball of yarn she'd found. Sarah talked more than she had in weeks, asking Jake questions about the ranch and the horses, and what it was like growing up in such a small town. Marcus, surprisingly, contributed to the conversation without being prompted. He told Jake about a car show he'd attended in Denver and asked detailed questions about the restoration process for the Mustang. Jake listened with genuine interest, treating Marcus's opinions with the same respect he'd show an adult. After dinner, Jake showed them around the rest of the house. The living room had a wall of built-in bookshelves filled with everything from classic literature to agricultural texts to what looked like an impressive collection of mysteries. There were photographs scattered throughout Jake with various horses, Jake with an elderly woman who must have been his grandmother, Jake in what looked like a military dress uniform. "You were in the service?" Claire asked, pausing in front of that photograph. "Army. Did 2 tours in Afghanistan." Jake's voice was neutral, but Claire heard the weight behind the words. She thought about the scar on his face, about the way he sometimes seemed to carry invisible burdens, and decided not to push for details. Everyone had parts of their story they weren't ready to share. The evening ended with Jake walking them home across the darkening field, carrying Emma when she got too tired to walk. At their front door, the children thanked him enthusiastically, already making plans for future visits. "Thank you," Claire said quietly after the kids had gone inside. "Today was exactly what they needed." "What about you?" Jake asked. "Was it what you needed?" The question caught her off guard. When was the last time someone had asked what she needed, rather than just assuming she'd take care of everyone else's needs first? "I had a wonderful time," she said honestly. "I can't remember the last time I saw all 4 of them happy at the same place at the same time." "They're good kids, Claire. And you're doing a good job with them, even if it doesn't always feel that way." Something in his voice made her look up at him more closely. In the porch light, his face was all angles and shadows, but his eyes were gentle. "How do you know so much about single parenting when you don't have children of your own?" she asked. Jake was quiet for so long that Claire thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "I was engaged. Once. She had 2 kids from her first marriage. I thought I was ready to be a stepfather, but when it came time to actually do it..." He shrugged. "Turns out there's a difference between liking the idea of a ready-made family and being able to handle the reality of it." "What happened?" "I messed it up," Jake said simply. "Said some things I shouldn't have said, made some assumptions I shouldn't have made. By the time I realized what I was throwing away, she'd moved on. Married a guy who was better at the whole package deal than I was." Claire studied his face in the dim light. "How long ago?" 3 years. Jake met her eyes. "I've had a lot of time to think about what I did wrong and what I'd do differently if I got another chance." There was something in his voice that made Claire's pulse quicken, something that suggested this conversation wasn't entirely about the past. "Well," she said carefully, "we should probably do this again sometime. The kids had a great time." "So did I," Jake said. "How about next Saturday? I could teach Sarah some basic riding, and Marcus could help me with the Mustang. If you're interested." "That sounds perfect," Claire said, and met it. As Jake walked back across the field toward his house, Claire stood on her porch and watched until his tall figure disappeared into the darkness. For the first time since her divorce, she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed: hope. The second Saturday visit turned into a third, then a fourth, until spending weekend afternoons at the Double M Ranch became as natural as breathing. Claire found herself looking forward to those visits more than she cared to admit, not just because the children were happy, but because of the way Jake looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, like she was something worth looking at. It was the beginning of November when everything shifted. Claire was grading papers at her kitchen table while Emma played with her dolls in the living room, when she heard the distinctive rumble of Jake's truck pulling into their driveway. She glanced at the clock. It was barely 8 in the morning, far too early for a social call. Through the window, she could see Jake climbing out of his truck, but something was wrong with the way he moved. His usual confident stride was replaced by something more careful, and when he knocked on her door, there was an urgency to it that made her heart skip. "Jake, what's wrong?" she asked as she opened the door. "I need to ask a favor," he said without preamble. "A big one. My foreman's wife went into labor 3 weeks early, and I need to get them to the hospital in Billings. It's going to be an all-day thing, maybe overnight. And I've got 30 head of cattle that need to be moved to the south pasture before the storm hits tonight. Claire blinked. Storm? Weather Service is calling for 6 inches of snow starting around 5 o'clock. If those cattle aren't moved, they'll be stuck in the north pasture without adequate shelter. Jake ran a hand through his hair, and Claire noticed it was shaking slightly. I know this is crazy, but Marcus mentioned he can drive stick shift, and Tommy's been helping me with the cattle enough that he knows the routine. I need someone to drive the truck while the boys help me move the herd. You want me to help you move cattle? Claire asked, certain she'd misunderstood. I want Marcus to help me move cattle while you drive the truck, Jake corrected. It's not complicated. You just follow behind us at about 5 miles per hour while we guide the cattle down the road. Tommy can sit with you and watch for strays. Claire's mind reeled. She'd never driven a truck, never been around 30 cows at once, never done anything remotely agricultural in her entire life. Jake, I don't know anything about Claire. His voice was steady but urgent. I wouldn't ask if I had any other choice. My closest neighbor is 40 miles away, and there's no one else I can call. I'll teach you everything you need to know, and it'll only take a couple of hours. But if I don't get Tom and Janet to the hospital soon, they might not make it. The raw worry in his voice decided her. Okay, she said. Give me 10 minutes to get everyone ready. 20 minutes later, Claire found herself behind the wheel of Jake's massive pickup truck, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. Beside her, Tommy was practically vibrating with excitement, while Marcus sat in the back with Sarah and Emma, trying to look bored but failing to hide his anticipation. Jake had spent 15 minutes teaching her the basics: clutch, gear shift, the importance of going slowly and smoothly. The truck was a manual transmission, which Claire hadn't driven since college, but muscle memory was slowly returning. Remember, Jake said through the open driver's window, mounted on Ranger, his working horse, just follow behind us. If the cattle start to scatter, stop where you are and let us round them up. Your job is to be a moving wall, not a herder. The cattle were already gathered in a loose group near the gate between pastures. They looked enormous up close, black and brown bodies shifting restlessly as they sensed the coming weather. Jake and Marcus, also on horseback when had Marcus learned to ride, positioned themselves on either side of the herd. This is so cool, Tommy breathed as Claire carefully put the truck in first gear and began to roll forward. What followed was 2 hours that felt simultaneously like the longest and shortest of Claire's life. The cattle moved in a flowing mass down the dirt road, surprisingly cooperative once they understood the direction they were supposed to go. Claire quickly learned the rhythm: slow and steady, stopping when the herd bunched up, moving forward when they spread out again. Marcus looked like he'd been born in the saddle, working in perfect coordination with Jake to keep the cattle moving in the right direction. When a few young steers tried to break away from the group, he responded with quick, confident movements that spoke of natural instinct combined with Jake's patient teaching. "Mom, look at Marcus," Sarah called from the back seat. "He's like a real cowboy." Claire glanced in the rearview mirror and saw what Sarah meant. Marcus sat tall in the saddle, his face focused and serious as he guided his horse Honey. Claire realized to cut off a wayward calf. For the first time since they'd moved to Montana, he looked completely in his element. The south pasture had a large shelter built against a stand of trees, with hay feeders already in place. As the last of the cattle filed through the gate, Jake rode over to the truck. "You did great," he said, his smile wide and genuine. "I couldn't have done it without you." "Marcus did all the work," Claire said, but she felt a flush of pride at the accomplishment. "I just drove in a straight line." "You did exactly what needed to be done," Jake said. "That's what matters." As they drove back to the main ranch, fat snowflakes began to fall. By the time they reached the house, the ground was already starting to turn white. We made it just in time, Jake said, glancing at the sky. Another hour and those cattle would have been miserable. Inside the ranch house, Claire made coffee while Jake called the hospital to check on his foreman and his wife. The news was, good healthy baby girl, everyone doing well. When he hung up, his relief was palpable. Thank you, he said to Claire, and then louder to include all the children. All of you. I know this wasn't exactly how you planned to spend your Saturday. Morning, are you kidding? Marcus said, his eyes still bright with excitement. That was the best thing I've done since we moved here. Can we do it again sometime? Jake's smile was warm. Cattle need to be moved pretty regularly. If your mom's okay with it, I could use the help. I think we can arrange that, Claire said, surprising herself. A month ago, the idea of helping with ranch work would have terrified her. Now it felt like a natural extension of the life they were building here. The snow continued to fall throughout the day, and what had been planned as a quick favor turned into an impromptu sleepover when Jake pointed out that the road back to their house was becoming impassable. I can't ask you to put us up for the night, Claire protested, but Jake waved off her concerns. I've got plenty of room, and it's not safe to drive in this weather, especially after dark. Besides, he added with a grin, I owe you dinner after all the work you did today. That evening, as the wind howled outside and snow piled against the windows, Claire found herself in Jake's kitchen helping him prepare what he called cowboy stew, a hearty mixture of beef, vegetables, and spices that filled the house with incredible smells. The children had settled into the evening routine as if they'd been staying at the ranch for weeks. Emma was curled up in front of the fireplace with Rusty the cat, reading a picture book she'd found on Jake's shelves. Tommy was helping Sarah with a jigsaw puzzle on the coffee table. Marcus had claimed a corner of the couch with a book about car restoration that Jake had lent him. This feels very domestic, Claire said quietly as she stirred the stew. Does that bother you? Jake asked, moving to stand beside her at the stove. No, Claire said, and realized she meant it. It feels nice, normal, like something we could get used to. Jake's hand covered hers on the spoon handle. I'd like that, he said. Getting used to this. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility. Claire looked up at him, acutely aware of how close he was standing, how warm his hand felt on hers, how his eyes seemed to be asking a question she wasn't sure she was ready to answer. Jake, she began, but was interrupted by Emma's voice from the living room. Mommy, can we live here? This house is so much bigger than ours. And Jake has horses and cats in that really big bathtub upstairs. The moment shattered, but not unpleasantly. Jake stepped back with a rueful smile, and Claire found herself laughing. We have our own house, sweetheart, she called back. Remember? With your sunflower room? But this house has a sunflower room. Too, Emma insisted. Jake showed me. It's yellow and has windows that look at the mountains. Claire looked at Jake questioningly. Sunflower room? The guest room upstairs, Jake said, looking slightly embarrassed. My grandmother decorated it. Always said yellow was the most cheerful color for visitors. Emma has strong opinions about sunflowers, Claire explained. I noticed, Jake said. She's mentioned them approximately 15 times since I've known her. Dinner was a comfortable affair, with the children chattering about their snow day adventure and Jake telling stories about other cattle drives, other storms, other times when ranch life had required quick thinking and cooperation. Claire found herself studying his face as he talked, noting the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the unconscious gesture he made when he was thinking, the way he included each child in the conversation without making it feel forced. After the children were settled for the night, Emma and Sarah in the sunflower room, Tommy and Jake's study on a pull-out couch, and Marcus in the spare room downstairs, Claire found herself alone with Jake in front of the fireplace. I should probably get some sleep too, she said, but made no move to get up from the couch. Probably, Jake agreed, but he didn't move either. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance in the fireplace and listening to the wind outside. Claire felt more relaxed than she had in months, despite being in an unfamiliar place during an unexpected storm. "Can I ask you something?" Jake said eventually. "Of course." "What made you decide to come to Montana? Really, I mean. It's a big change from Denver." Claire considered her answer carefully. "Derek, my ex-husband, used to say I never took risks. That I was too careful, too predictable. When the divorce was final and I had to figure out what to do next, I realized he was right. I'd spent so many years being safe that I'd forgotten how to be brave. So you moved to Montana." "So I moved to Montana," Claire confirmed. "With 4 kids and no job prospects and no idea what I was doing. Derek said I'd be back within 6 months, begging him to take us back." "And how's that working out for him?" Jake asked with a slight smile. "Well, it's been 4 months, and I have no desire to go anywhere," Claire said. "The kids are happier here than they've been in years. I'm happier here." "What makes you happy about it?" Jake asked. "Besides the obvious benefits for the kids." Claire thought about that. "I think it's the feeling that I can be useful here. In Denver, I felt like I was just going through the motions, teaching, taking care of the kids, managing the household. Here, it feels like what I do matters. Like when I helped you move the cattle today. I was actually necessary." "You were," Jake said seriously. "I couldn't have done it without you." "I know that's not literally true. It is literally true." Jake interrupted. "Claire, I've been running this ranch by myself for 3 years. I've had to ask for help maybe a dozen times in all that time, and never with something as important as moving cattle before a storm. The fact that I called you says something." "What does it say?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. "It says I trust you. It says I think of you as someone I can rely on. It says ... double quotes." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "It says you're not just the neighbor anymore." Claire's heart began to beat faster. "What am I then?" "I don't know yet," Jake said honestly. "But I'd like to find out, if you're interested." Before Claire could answer, a crash of thunder made them both jump. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely, leaving them in the shifting glow of the fireplace. "Well," Jake said after a moment, "that's not good. Does this happen often?" Claire asked, trying to keep the nervousness out of her voice. "Often enough that I keep flashlights and candles handy," Jake said, moving carefully in the dim light. "Generators in the barn, but I'm not going out in this storm. To start it tonight, we'll be fine until morning." He returned with an armload of candles and battery-powered lanterns, setting them around the room until it felt cozy rather than dark. The wind continued to howl outside, and occasionally they could hear the crack of tree branches breaking under the weight of snow. "The kids will be okay?" Claire asked. "They'll sleep right through it," Jake assured her. "Kids always do. It's the adults who worry about storms." They settled back onto the couch, closer together now in the candlelight. The power outage had created an intimacy that felt both natural and charged with possibility. "Jake," Claire said, "about what you said earlier ... about wanting to find out what you are to me?" "Yes, I think ... double quotes." Claire took a breath. "I think I'd like to find out too." Jake's smile was slow and warm. "Good," he said. "That's very good." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the ranch house, surrounded by the soft glow of candles and the warmth of the fire, Claire felt safer than she had in years. Whatever was happening between her and Jake, whatever they were becoming to each other, it felt right in a way that nothing had felt right in a very long time. As if reading her thoughts, Jake reached over and took her hand. "We'll figure it out," he said quietly. "Whatever this is, whatever it becomes, we'll figure it out together." Claire squeezed his hand and settled back against the couch cushions. For the first time since her divorce, the future felt full of possibilities instead of obstacles. And for tonight, that was enough. 3 weeks after the storm, Claire was discovering that small towns had their own unique way of making private business public knowledge. It started with casual comments at the grocery store. "Heard you folks weathered that storm real cozy over at Jake's place," and escalated to pointed questions from other teachers at school about whether she was seeing the Morrison boy. "He's hardly a boy," Claire had replied to Janet Hendricks, the first-grade teacher who seemed to consider herself the unofficial keeper of Millbrook's romantic gossip. "Jake's 34 years old. Same age as you, then," Janet had said with obvious satisfaction. "Perfect match. His grandmother always said that boy needed a good woman to settle him down." Claire had escaped that conversation before it could go further, but the knowing looks and whispered conversations followed her everywhere. By Thursday afternoon, she was beginning to understand why Jake had seemed amused when she'd mentioned their newfound friendship to him the previous weekend. "They're all talking about us, aren't they?" she'd asked him while they watched the children play in the barn. "Small town," Jake had said with a shrug. "People talk, they mean well. Doesn't it bother you?" Jake had considered this seriously. "My grandmother used to say that the day people stop talking about you is the day you stop mattering to anyone. I figure there are worse things than being the subject of speculation." Now, as Claire sat in her classroom after hours grading spelling tests, she was beginning to see his point. The attention felt intrusive, but underneath the annoyance was something else, a warm flutter of possibility that maybe there was something worth speculating about. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Emergency at the ranch. Can you pick up Marcus from school and bring him over? We'll explain later." Claire's stomach dropped. Marcus had been staying after school twice a week to help Jake with the Mustang restoration, an arrangement that had transformed her sullen teenager into someone who actually smiled at dinner. If something had happened to Jake... She texted back immediately. "On my way. Is everyone okay?" The response came quickly. "Everyone's fine. Just need Marcus's help with something urgent." 15 minutes later, Claire was pulling into the school parking lot where Marcus was waiting with his backpack and a confused expression. "What's going on?" he asked as he climbed into the car. "Jake just said there was an emergency and he needed me to come to the ranch." "I don't know," Claire admitted. "He said everyone was fine, but that's all I know." The drive to the Double M felt longer than usual. Claire's mind raced through possibilities: injured cattle, equipment failure, some kind of ranch crisis that required Marcus's specific skills. It wasn't until they pulled into the ranch yard and saw Jake standing next to what appeared to be a fully restored, gleaming blue Mustang that understanding dawned. "Oh my God," Marcus breathed, staring at the car. "Is that..." "Happy early birthday," Jake said as they approached. "I know it's not until next week, but I couldn't wait." Marcus stood frozen, his mouth hanging open. "You finished it?" "We finished it," Jake corrected. "Every bolt you turned, every part you helped install this is as much your car as it is mine." Claire felt tears prick her eyes as she watched her son's face cycle through disbelief, wonder, and pure joy. "Jake," she said quietly, "this is too much. I can't let you. It's not a gift," Jake said quickly. "It's a business transaction. Marcus has put in over 60 hours of work on this restoration. At $15 an hour, that's $900. The car's worth about $8,000 in this condition, which means he's earned an 11% stake in it." "Which means what, exactly?" Claire asked, though Marcus was already walking around the car with reverent hands, touching the chrome bumper and the freshly painted hood. "Which means Marcus is my business partner," Jake said. "We're going to take this car to shows, maybe sell it for a profit, maybe keep it and restore another one. Depends on what Marcus wants to do." Marcus looked up from examining the engine. "You're serious? We're partners?" 50-50 split on anything we make from this car, Jake confirmed. But more importantly, you're going to learn every aspect of the business. Buying cars, estimating restoration costs, marketing, selling. By the time you graduate high school, you'll know whether you want to make this your career. Claire watched her son transform before her eyes. The angry, sullen teenager who'd moved to Montana 6 months ago was gone, replaced by a young man who stood taller, smiled wider, and looked at Jake with something approaching hero worship. "Can I drive it?" Marcus asked. "You can drive it," Jake said, "but first, you need to get your learner's permit. And you need to promise your mom that you'll be careful and responsible." "I promise," Marcus said solemnly, looking at Claire. "Mom, I promise I'll be the most careful driver in Montana." Claire found herself nodding, though part of her wondered. When Jake had become someone who could make decisions about her children's lives, the thought should have bothered her more than it did. That evening, after Marcus had called everyone he knew to tell them about the Mustang, and after Jake had driven them all home in his truck, while Marcus followed carefully in the restored car, Claire found herself standing in her kitchen, trying to process what had just happened. The other children had gone to bed, exhausted from the excitement of Marcus's transformation and the endless questions about when they might get to ride in the Mustang. Marcus himself was in the garage, even though the car was parked at Jake's ranch, reading car magazines and making notes about future projects. Claire was washing dishes when she heard Jake's truck pull into the driveway again, through the window. She watched him walk up to her front door with the slow, careful gait of someone who wasn't sure of his welcome. "Is everything okay?" he asked when she opened the door. "I don't know," Claire said honestly. "Can you come in? We need to talk." Jake followed her into the kitchen, his hat in his hands and an expression of concern on his face. "If this is about the car, I should have asked you first. I got excited about surprising Marcus, and I didn't think." "It's not about the car," Claire interrupted. "Well, it's not just about the car. Jake, what are we doing here? I'm not sure I understand." Claire turned to face him fully. "You're making business deals with my 14-year-old son. You're teaching my daughter to ride horses. You're letting my youngest daughter redecorate your barn with cat toys. You single quotes re ... She gestured helplessly. "You're becoming part of their lives in ways that feel permanent, and I don't know what that means." Jake was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want it to mean?" "That's not fair," Claire said. "You can't answer my question with another question." "Okay," Jake said, setting his hat on the counter and moving closer to her. "Then here's what I think it means. I think it means I'm falling in love with you, Claire. All of you. Not just you, but Tommy and his endless questions about horses, and Emma and her sunshine smile, and Sarah and the way she rides like she was born to it, and Marcus and his brilliant mind that can see how an engine fits together like it's a puzzle." Claire's breath caught. "Jake, I know it's complicated," he continued. "I know you've got 4 kids and an ex-husband and a life that was already full before I showed up. I know I'm just a cowboy with a ranch and not much else to offer except hard work and the promise that I'll never walk away when things get difficult." "You think that's not much to offer?" Claire asked softly. "I think it's everything I have," Jake said. "And I think you deserve to know that before we go any further. Because, Claire, I don't want to be just the neighbor anymore. I don't want to be just the guy who helps out in emergencies. I want to be the person you call when you're happy, when you're sad, when you need help, when you want to celebrate. I want to be part of your family, officially and permanently, if you'll have me." Claire stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "You want to marry me?" "I want to marry all of you," Jake said. "I want to adopt Tommy and Sarah and Marcus and Emma if they'll let me. I want Sunday morning pancakes and homework help and soccer games, and everything that comes with being a family. I want to be there for first dates and graduation and college decisions, and whatever comes next." That's a lot to take on, Claire said, though her voice was shaky with emotion. It's everything I've ever wanted, Jake said simply. I just never thought I'd be lucky enough to find it. Claire felt tears sliding down her cheeks. We come as a package deal. You can't just pick the easy parts. I don't want the easy parts, Jake said, reaching up to wipe away her tears with his thumb. I want the hard parts too. I want the sleepless nights when someone's sick, and the arguments about curfew, and the worry when they start driving. I want all of it, Claire, with you. What if we mess it up? Claire whispered. What if the kids get attached and then something goes wrong? What if you decide it's too much after all? What if we don't mess it up? Jake countered. What if it's exactly what we're all supposed to have? What if I love them for the rest of my life, and they love me back? What if we build something beautiful together? Claire looked into his green eyes and saw absolute sincerity there, no doubt or reservation. You really mean it, all of it. Every word, Jake said. Claire, I've been alone for 3 years thinking I'd missed my chance at having a family. Then, you moved in next door with your beautiful, complicated, wonderful kids, and suddenly everything I thought I knew about my life changed. I don't want to go back to being alone. I don't want to go back to a house that's too quiet and meals for one, and no one to worry about except myself. The kids don't know, Claire said. About how we feel, I mean. They think we're just friends. We? Jake asked with a slight smile. Just friends? Claire shook her head. No, we haven't been just friends for weeks. Then maybe it's time to stop pretending we are, Jake said. Maybe it's time to see what happens when we stop holding back. Claire considered this. The smart thing, the careful thing, would be to take it slow. To date quietly, to keep the children out of it until she was sure, to protect everyone from potential heartbreak. But standing in her kitchen looking at Jake Morrison, seeing the hope and love in his eyes, Claire realized she was tired of being careful. Okay, she said. Let's see what happens. Jake's smile was brilliant. Yeah, Claire said, and then she was in his arms, kissing him for the first time, tasting the possibility of everything he'd promised. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Jake rested his forehead against hers. So, he said, how do we tell the kids? Carefully, Claire said. Emma's going to want to start planning the wedding immediately. And Marcus? Marcus is going to want to know if this means he gets to keep the Mustang, Claire said with a laugh. That's an easy one, Jake said. Of course he gets to keep the Mustang. He's going to be my son. The word son hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and possibility. Claire thought about Marcus's face that afternoon, the pride and joy when Jake had called him a partner. She thought about Tommy's endless enthusiasm for everything ranch-related, Sarah's natural grace with the horses, Emma's immediate assumption that Jake's house could be their house too. They're going to love this, she said quietly. I hope so, Jake said, because I love them, all of them. And I love you, Claire Peterson, more than I ever thought possible. I love you too, Claire said, and realized it was the absolute truth. Somewhere between that first morning by the fence and this moment in her kitchen, she'd fallen completely and irrevocably in love with Jake Morrison. Outside, snow was beginning to fall again, but this time Claire wasn't worried about storms or being stranded or having to navigate difficult weather. This time, she knew exactly where they would go when the roads became impassable. They would go home, all of them together, to the ranch house with the sunflower room and the fireplace, and the man who wanted nothing more than to love them all for the rest of his life. And for the first time since her divorce, Claire could picture the future clearly. It looked like Sunday morning pancakes and homework help at the kitchen table. It looked like teaching Emma to ride and watching Marcus rebuild engines and helping Sarah gain confidence in everything she tried. It looked like growing old with Jake Morrison, building something beautiful and lasting and real. It looked like family. 3 months later, on a crisp February morning, that made the mountains look like they'd been painted against the sky. Claire stood in front of her bathroom mirror, trying to decide if the navy blue dress was too formal for a custody hearing. Her hands shook as she applied lipstick, and she had to start over twice when her phone buzzed with increasingly frantic texts. From Derek's lawyer. The call had come the week before, completely out of nowhere. Derek wanted the children back. Not just visitation, full custody. His lawyer claimed that Claire had been living in sin with a man the children barely knew, that she'd moved them to an isolated rural environment without proper consideration for their educational and social development, and that the children were being exposed to dangerous activities on the ranch. "It's harassment," Jake had said when Claire showed him the papers. "Derek doesn't want the kids back. He wants to hurt you for being happy without him." Claire knew Jake was right, but that didn't make the fear any less real. What if the judge believed Derek's lies? What if she lost them? The children didn't know about the hearing. Claire had told them she had a meeting in town, and Jake had volunteered to take the day off to watch them. Emma was already at the ranch, convinced she was helping Jake with very important horse business that involved brushing buckwheat and feeding him carrots. The older kids would go to the ranch after school. "You look beautiful," Jake said from the doorway, his reflection appearing behind hers in the mirror. "And strong. Like someone who's built a good life for her children and isn't going to let anyone take it away from her." Claire turned to face him, noting how handsome he looked in his dark suit, the same one from the military photograph in his living room. She realized, "You didn't have to come. This isn't your fight." "Yes, it is," Jake said simply. "They're my kids too now. Maybe not legally yet, but in every way that matters. Derek wants to hurt them to get back at you, and I won't stand for that." The drive to the courthouse took 40 minutes, and Claire spent most of it practicing what she would say if called to testify. Her lawyer, Patricia Holbrook, had prepared her thoroughly, but Claire's mind kept going blank every time she tried to remember the key points. "Breathe," Jake said, reaching over to take her hand. "You're a good mother, Claire. Anyone who spends 5 minutes with those kids can see how much they love you and how well they're doing. The truth is on our side." The courthouse in Billings was smaller than Claire had expected, and when they walked into the hearing room, she was surprised to see Derek sitting alone at a table with his lawyer. No family support, no girlfriend, just a man in expensive suit who looked older than his 35 years and remarkably uncomfortable. Claire hadn't seen Derek since the day he'd moved out of their house in Denver, and the sight of him now filled her with an unexpected emotion, pity. He looked diminished somehow, like success in his corporate job couldn't quite compensate for whatever emptiness had driven him to abandon his family and then try to reclaim them out of spite. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Crane," the bailiff announced. Judge Crane was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She reviewed the case files silently for several minutes before speaking. "This is a motion to modify custody brought by Mr. Derek Peterson regarding his 4 minor children," she said. "Mr. Peterson, your motion alleges that the children's current living situation is unsuitable. Can you elaborate on your specific concerns?" Derek's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, Miss Peterson has relocated the children to an isolated rural community against their best interests. She's cohabitating with a man they barely know, exposing them to dangerous ranch activities, and prioritizing her romantic relationship over their stability and education." "Miss Peterson," Judge Crane said, turning to Claire's lawyer, "how do you respond to these allegations?" Patricia Holbrook rose confidently. "Your Honor, Miss Peterson has created a stable, loving home for her children in Millbrook, Montana. She's employed as a teacher at the local elementary school. The children are thriving academically and socially, and her relationship with Mr. Morrison has been beneficial to the entire family. Mr. Peterson, meanwhile, has had minimal contact with the children since the divorce and is seeking custody not out of genuine concern for their welfare, but as a form of harassment against his ex-wife. "I'd like to hear from Miss Peterson directly," Judge Crane said. "Miss Peterson, please tell me about your decision to move to Montana and how your children have adjusted." Claire stood on shaking legs, but once she began speaking, her voice grew stronger. She talked about the job opportunity, about Tommy's improvement in school since they'd moved, about Sarah's newfound confidence and Marcus's transformation from an angry teenager to a responsible young man with direction and purpose. "And what is the nature of your relationship with Mr. Morrison?" Judge Crane asked. "Jake, Mr. Morrison has become an important part of our lives," Claire said carefully. "He's been a mentor to Marcus, teaching him automotive skills and responsibility. He's helped Sarah learn to ride horses, which has given her tremendous confidence. He's patient with Emma and Tommy, answering their endless questions and including them in age-appropriate ranch activities. He's been nothing but a positive influence on all 4 children. Are you living together?" "No, Your Honor, we have separate residences. The children and I live in our own home in town. Mr. Morrison lives at his ranch about a mile away." Derek's lawyer objected. "Your Honor, despite maintaining separate residences, Ms. Peterson and Mr. Morrison are in a romantic relationship and spend significant time together, which creates confusion and instability for the children. Mr. Peterson," Judge Crane said, turning to Derek, "when did you last see your children?" Derek shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "It's been several months. My work schedule makes it difficult to travel to Montana." "And prior to their move to Montana, how often did you exercise your visitation rights?" "My work schedule has always been demanding," Derek said defensively. "But I provided financially for my family." "That wasn't my question," Judge Crane said. Coolly, "How often did you see your children when they lived in Denver?" Derek's lawyer whispered something to him before he answered. "Perhaps not as often as I should have. But that's why I'm here now. I want to be more involved in their lives. By removing them from a stable home where they're thriving and bringing them back to Denver, where you admittedly have limited time for them due to your work schedule." "I can make time," Derek said. But even he didn't sound convinced. Judge Crane was quiet for a long moment, reviewing the files again. "I'd like to speak with the children," she announced. "Not in a formal hearing, but in chambers. I want to understand their perspective on their current living situation." Claire's heart sank. The children didn't even know about this hearing. How could she explain that their father wanted to take them away from the life they'd built in Montana? "Your Honor," Patricia Holbrook said, "the children are currently unaware of these proceedings. Ms. Peterson was hoping to shield them from this conflict." "I understand that impulse," Judge Crane said. "However, in custody matters involving children of these ages, particularly the older ones, their preferences and feelings about their living situation are relevant to the court's decision. I'm ordering a brief recess. Ms. Peterson, please arrange for the children to be brought here within 2 hours." The next hour and a half were the longest of Claire's life. Jake drove back to Millbrook to collect the children while Claire sat in a small conference room with her lawyer, trying to figure out how to explain the situation without terrifying them. When Jake returned with all 4 children, their confusion was evident. Tommy and Emma seemed excited about the adventure of visiting a courthouse, while Sarah and Marcus clearly sensed that something serious was happening. "Mom, what's going on?" Sarah asked immediately. "Jake said we needed to come here for a meeting, but he wouldn't tell us why." Claire knelt down so she was at eye level with the younger children and gestured for Sarah and Marcus to sit beside her. "Your father has asked a judge to let you come live with him in Denver," she said as gently as possible. "The judge wants to talk to you about where you want to live and how you feel about our life in Montana." The reaction was immediate and unanimous. "I don't want to live with Dad," Emma said, her eyes filling with tears. "I want to stay here with you and Jake and Buckwheat and Rusty." He can't make us go, can he? Tommy asked, looking between Claire and Jake with worry. Marcus's response was more complicated. Is this why you've been so stressed lately? Dad's trying to take us away? The judge just wants to hear what you think, Claire said. You can tell her exactly how you feel about living here versus living in Denver. I'll tell her, Marcus said grimly. I'll tell her exactly what I think about Dad suddenly deciding he wants to be a parent. The conversation with Judge Crane took place in her chambers, a less formal setting that felt more like a family living room than a courtroom. She spoke with each child individually, asking about school, friends, activities, and how they felt about their life in Montana versus their memories of Denver. Claire waited outside with Jake, pacing the hallway and trying not to imagine the worst-case scenarios. They'll tell the truth, Jake said quietly. And the truth is that they're happy here. They're thriving. They feel loved and secure. What if that's not enough? Claire asked. What if Derek convinces the judge that I'm being selfish, putting my own happiness ahead of theirs? Then the judge will be making a mistake, Jake said firmly. But I don't think that's going to happen. I've seen how these kids have blossomed since they moved here. Any reasonable person can see the difference. When the children emerged from the judge's chambers, Emma ran straight to Claire and wrapped her arms around her waist. Tommy looked relieved, Sarah seemed determined, and Marcus had the expression of someone who just delivered an important speech. How did it go? Claire asked. I told her about Honey, Sarah said, and about how I'm not scared of anything anymore since Jake taught me to ride. I told her about the Mustang, Marcus added, and about how Jake treats me like I'm smart and capable instead of just a problem to solve. I told her about Rusty and Buckwheat and how Jake lets me help with the horses, Tommy said. And I told her that Denver doesn't have any horses. What did you tell her, sweetheart? Claire asked Emma. I told her that Jake makes the best pancakes and that he reads me stories about princesses and horses, Emma said seriously. And I told her that Daddy never reads me stories. Back in the courtroom, Judge Crane delivered her decision with the efficiency of someone who'd seen too many custody battles and had little patience for parents who used their children as weapons. Having reviewed all the evidence and spoken with the children involved, I find no compelling reason to modify the current custody arrangement, she said. The children are clearly thriving in their current environment. They're doing well academically, they've formed strong social connections, and they feel secure and loved in their current home. Claire felt Jake's hand squeeze hers as relief flooded through her. Furthermore, Judge Crane continued, looking directly at Derek, I find Mr. Peterson's motion to be motivated more by a desire to punish his ex-wife than by genuine concern for his children's welfare. Mr. Peterson, if you truly wish to be more involved in your children's lives, I suggest you use your visitation rights more consistently and consider making the effort to visit them in Montana rather than disrupting their established routine. Your Honor, Derek's lawyer began, but Judge Crane held up a hand. My decision is final. This case is closed. Outside the courthouse, Derek approached them as they were loading the children into Jake's truck. Claire tensed, but Jake stepped slightly forward, not threateningly, but clearly protective. Claire, Derek said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. Can I talk to you for a minute? Claire looked at Jake, who nodded slightly, then at the children. Stay in the truck, she told them. We'll just be a minute. Derek looked older up close, she realized. Tired and somehow smaller than she remembered. I want you to know that wasn't my idea, he said quietly. The custody thing. My girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, now she kept saying you were making me look bad, that I needed to fight for my kids. I should have known better. Yes, you should have, Claire said, her voice steady despite the anger simmering underneath. You terrified them, Derek. Emma spent all last week asking if she was going to have to leave her cats. I know, I'm sorry. Derek glanced toward the truck where 4 faces were pressed against the windows, watching. They looked good, happy. I haven't seen Marcus smile like that since, well, in a long time. Montana has been good for all of us, Claire said. And Jake? Derek asked. He's good for them too? Claire was surprised by the question and by the genuine curiosity in Derek's voice. Jake loves them, all of them. He shows up, Derek, every day. He's patient and kind, and he makes them feel like they matter. Derek nodded slowly. Good. They deserve that. He paused, looking at the mountains in the distance. I screwed up, Claire, with all of you. I know that now. Yes, you did, Claire said, but without malice. But it's not too late to be a better father. They still need you in their lives, just differently than before. I'd like to visit sometime, Derek said. If that's okay. Actually spend time with them instead of just showing up for the parts that are convenient. They'd like that, Claire sighed and meant it. They shouldn't have to choose between parents. After Derek left, Claire climbed into the truck where 4 excited children were already planning their celebration dinner. Jake started the engine but didn't immediately pull out of the parking lot. You okay? He asked quietly. Better than okay, Claire said, reaching for his hand. I'm ready to go home. All of us? Jake asked, and Claire understood he was asking about more than just the ride home. All of us, she confirmed, looking back at the children who were arguing good-naturedly about whether to celebrate with pizza or Chinese food. All 5 of us. As they drove back toward Millbrook with the setting sun painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Claire felt a sense of completeness she'd never experienced before. Her family was intact, her future was secure, and sitting beside her was the man who'd looked at her complicated life and said, I want 5. Sometimes the best things in life came in packages you never expected, from directions you never saw coming, and in forms that didn't match anything you'd thought you wanted. Sometimes the best things in life came from taking a chance on a tall cowboy who understood that love wasn't about choosing the easy path. It was about choosing the path you wanted to walk together, no matter how challenging it might be. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, that path led you home, 6 months after the custody hearing. Claire woke up on a Saturday morning in May to the sound of Emma's delighted laughter echoing across the ranch yard. She padded to the kitchen window of Jake's house, their house now, officially, since they'd moved in together 3 weeks ago, and smiled at the sight of her youngest daughter chasing Rusty around the vegetable garden while Tommy tried to explain why cats shouldn't be involved in planting tomatoes. The transition had been surprisingly smooth. Emma had claimed the sunflower room as her own with the enthusiasm of a conquering general. Sarah had fallen in love with the window seat in what was now her bedroom, and Marcus had basically moved into the garage where he and Jake had started their second restoration project. A 1969 Camaro they'd bought at auction. Tommy had been the only one with reservations. Not about moving to the ranch, but about whether it meant they were abandoning their old house completely. Jake had solved that worry by suggesting they keep the rental as a guest house for when Derek visited, or when the children wanted their own space. It was an expensive solution, but as Jake had pointed out, the ranch made good money and family came first. Coffee's ready, Jake said, appearing in the kitchen doorway with his hair still damp from the shower. Even after all these months, Claire felt a little flutter in her stomach when she saw him first thing in the morning, this tall, solid, incredibly kind man who'd chosen to love all of them. Sarah's already in the barn, Jake continued, handing her a mug. She wants to practice jumping before the show next weekend. Marcus is convinced he can get the Camaro's engine running by this afternoon, which is either optimistic or catastrophic, depending on your perspective. And Emma asked if she could paint Buckwheat's hooves to match her new nail polish. Please tell me you said no to the hoof painting, Claire said, though she was laughing. I told her we'd ask Buckwheat's opinion first, Jake said diplomatically. Figured that would buy me some time to come up with a better distraction. This was their life now comfortable morning. Conversations about children and horses and the gentle chaos of a house filled with love. It was everything Claire had never dared to dream about during those dark months after her divorce, when the future had seemed like nothing but obstacles and uncertainty. "Jake," she said, settling against the counter with her coffee, "do you ever miss it? The quiet? Having the house to yourself?" Jake considered this seriously, as he did most questions about their life together. "I miss being able to walk around naked," he said finally, making Claire snort coffee. "And I miss being able to eat cereal for dinner without anyone judging my nutritional choices. But miss the quiet? Never. This house was too quiet for too long." A crash from the direction of the garage interrupted their conversation, followed by Marcus's voice shouting, "I'm okay. Everything's fine." "Should we check on that?" Claire asked. "Marcus has excellent problem-solving skills," Jake said, though he was already moving toward the door. "But yes, we should probably check on that." They found Marcus standing over a pile of car parts that had apparently been stored on a shelf. That was now lying on the garage floor. He was covered in grease and looked sheepish but uninjured. "The shelf wasn't as sturdy as it looked," he explained. "But the good news is, I found the carburetor we've been looking for." Jake surveyed the damage and shrugged. "Well, we needed to reorganize the garage anyway. Good excuse to build better shelving." This was what Claire loved most about Jake, his ability to turn disasters into opportunities, to find the positive. In situations that would have sent Derek into a fury of blame and criticism, Marcus had learned to expect patience instead of anger, encouragement instead of judgment, and it had transformed him from a defensive, angry teenager into a confident young man who wasn't afraid to take risks and make mistakes. "I'll help you clean this up after I check on Sarah," Jake said. "But first, your mom and I need to talk to all of you about something." Marcus looked up sharply. "Everything okay?" "Everything's perfect," Jake assured him. "We just have some news to share." They gathered the children in the living room, which took some negotiating since Emma was reluctant to leave her barn cat supervision duties, and Tommy was in the middle of what he called very important horse observations involving Honey and a new foal that had been born the previous month. "This isn't bad news, is it?" Sarah asked as she settled onto the couch, still wearing her riding boots. "Because I really don't want any bad news today." "Definitely not bad news," Claire sighed, reaching for Jake's hand. They'd discussed how to handle this conversation, and had decided that simple and direct was the best approach. "Jake asked me to marry him," Claire announced, "and I said yes." The reaction was immediate and varied. Emma shrieked with delight and launched herself at Jake, climbing into his lap to demand details about the wedding dress and whether she could be the flower girl. Tommy whooped and asked if this meant Jake would officially be their dad. Sarah smiled widely and asked when the wedding would be. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and Claire felt a familiar flutter of worry. At 15, he was old enough to understand the complexity of the situation, old enough to have reservations about his mother remarrying. "Marcus," Claire asked gently, "what do you think?" "I think," Marcus said slowly, "that it's about time. I was starting to wonder if you two were ever going to figure it out." Jake laughed. "Out of the mouths of teenagers. Were we that obvious?" "Jake, you've been carrying Mom's groceries and fixing things around our old house for months," Marcus said. "And Mom, you've been wearing lipstick to feed the chickens." It wasn't exactly subtle. "I do not wear lipstick to feed the chickens," Claire protested. "You wore lipstick to help me clean the garage last week," Marcus pointed out, which was both cute and ridiculous. "When's the wedding?" Emma demanded. "Can I wear my princess dress? Can buckwheat be in the wedding? Can we have chocolate cake?" "We haven't planned anything yet," Claire said. "We just decided yesterday." "Actually," Jake said, "I have a suggestion about that. What would you think about a summer wedding?" "Right. Here on the ranch?" "Nothing too formal," just family and friends. Maybe some barbecue and dancing under the stars. That sounds perfect, Sarah said immediately. Can I help plan it? Can I plan it? Emma corrected. I have very good ideas about weddings. We'll all plan it together, Claire said. It's going to be a family wedding, so the whole family should be involved. Tommy had been unusually quiet during this discussion, and Claire noticed him fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. Tommy? What's on your mind, sweetheart? Will Derek still be our dad too? Tommy asked in a small voice. When Jake becomes our dad, I mean. It was the question Claire had been dreading, but Jake handled it with his typical thoughtfulness. Derek will always be your biological father, Jake said gently. Nothing can change that, and nothing should change that. But if you want me to, I'd be honored to be your dad too. Some kids are lucky enough to have more than one dad. So I'd have two dads? Tommy asked, brightening. If that's what you want, Jake said. What do you think about that? Tommy considered this seriously. I think that's pretty cool. Like having backup in case one dad is busy. Exactly like that. Jake agreed, and Claire felt her heart swell with love for this man who always knew exactly the right thing to say. The conversation continued for another hour, with the children asking questions about everything from whether they'd change their last names, their choice. Jake and Claire decided to whether this meant they could finally redecorate the guest bathroom. Absolutely not. According to Jake, who claimed Emma's interior design aesthetic was chaotic rainbow. Later, after the children had scattered to their various weekend activities, Claire found herself in the kitchen making lunch and marveling at how natural this all felt. A year ago, she'd been a struggling single mother trying to figure out how to rebuild her life. Now she was planning a wedding to a man who'd taken on her 4 children as enthusiastically as he'd taken on her. Penny for your thoughts, Jake. Solid, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. Just thinking about how much has changed, Claire said, leaning back against his chest. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined this. Any of this. Good changes? The best changes, Claire said, turning in his arms. Jake, are you sure about this? About taking on 4 kids and all the chaos that comes with them. Because it's only going to get more complicated. There will be teenage drama and college applications and first heartbreaks, and Jake silenced her with a kiss. Claire, he said. When they broke apart, I told you before. I don't want the easy parts. I want all of it. The complicated, messy, beautiful, chaotic all of it. Even when Emma decides she wants to paint all the horses to match her outfit. Especially then, Jake said solemnly. Though I reserve the right to negotiate on the horse painting. That afternoon, the house filled with the particular energy that came with all 4 children being happy and busy at the same time. Sarah practiced her jumping course with Honey while Jake coached from the fence. Marcus made significant progress on the Camaro's engine, accompanied by a soundtrack of classic rock that he insisted was essential for proper mechanical work. Tommy appointed himself official supervisor of the new foal, maintaining a detailed log of its daily activities. Emma spent 2 hours creating what she called wedding plans that involved enough flowers to deforest Montana and a reception menu consisting entirely of cake and ice cream. It was the kind of day that Derek would have found overwhelming, Claire realized. Too much noise, too much activity, too much unpredictability. But Jake thrived in it, moving easily from helping Sarah adjust her stirrups to listening to Marcus explain carburetor function to admiring Emma's increasingly elaborate wedding drawings. As evening approached, they gathered on the front porch for dinner: burgers from the grill, corn on the cob, and strawberry shortcake that Sarah had made with berries from their garden. The conversation flowed around the table, touching on everything from Marcus's plans for the summer, working full-time on car restorations with Jake, to Sarah's upcoming horse show to Tommy's campaign to convince everyone that the ranch needed chickens. Can we get married before school starts? Emma asked suddenly, her face serious. Because I want to tell Mrs. Peterson that Jake is my dad now, and it would be confusing if he wasn't married to Mom yet. Mrs. Peterson is your teacher, not your Mom, Sarah pointed out. Mom is Mom. I know that, Emma said with 5-year-old patience. But Mrs. Peterson and Mom have the same last name, and it gets confusing when people don't know which Peterson they're talking about. What if we all had the same last name? Jake suggested casually. Would that make it less confusing? The children looked at him with interest. You mean we'd all be Morrisons? Marcus asked. If you wanted to be, Jake said. You don't have to change your names. But if you wanted to, I'd be honored to share my name with all of you. Morrison. Tommy said, testing the sound. Tommy Morrison. That sounds pretty good. Sarah Morrison, Sarah said thoughtfully. I like it. Emma Morrison, Emma announced. That's a beautiful name for a princess. All eyes turned to Marcus, who was quiet for a long moment. At 15, he was old enough to understand the weight of choosing to take a stepfather's name, old enough to feel the potential complications with Derek. Would Derek be upset? Marcus asked finally. Maybe, Claire said honestly. But this isn't about Derek. This is about what feels right for you. Marcus nodded slowly. Marcus Morrison, he said finally. Yeah, I think I'd like that. Claire felt tears prick her eyes. Watching her children choose to become Morrisons felt like watching them choose their future, choose the family they wanted to be part of. So it's settled, Jake said, his voice slightly rough with emotion. The Morrison family it is. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Claire looked around the porch at her family, at Jake's strong profile, as he listened to Tommy's elaborate plan for the chicken coop, at Sarah's confident smile, as she described her jumping goals, at Marcus's relaxed posture as he sketched engine modifications on a napkin, at Emma's flour-stained fingers as she added details to her wedding plans. This was what happiness looked like, Claire realized. Not the dramatic, overwhelming emotion she'd expected, but this quiet contentment, this sense of everything being exactly as it should be. This feeling of being part of something bigger than herself, something built on choice and commitment, and the daily decision to love each other through all the beautiful, complicated moments that made up a life. A year ago, she'd been nobody's first choice. Derek had walked away, convinced that a woman with 4 children was too much trouble, too much responsibility, too much everything. He'd been wrong about that, but it had taken Jake Morrison to show her just how wrong. Jake hadn't just wanted her despite her children, he'd wanted her because of them. He'd looked at her complicated, chaotic, beautiful life and said, I want 5, not just the woman, but the whole package. The early morning rushes and the late night worries, the soccer games and the science projects, the teenage attitudes, and the little girl dreams. He'd wanted all of it, and in choosing all of it, he'd given all of them something precious, the knowledge that they were worth wanting, worth choosing, worth loving completely, and without reservation. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Claire reached for Jake's hand and squeezed it gently. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new moments of chaos and joy, and everything in between. But tonight, surrounded by the people she loved most in the world, Claire Morrison-to-be was exactly where she belonged. 1 year later, on a perfect August evening with fireflies dancing in the meadow grass, Claire Morrison stood at the kitchen window of the ranch house watching her husband teach their youngest son to properly stack hay bales. At 7 years old, little James Morrison was determined to be just as helpful as his older siblings, even though the hay bales were almost as tall as he was. The newest addition to the Morrison family had been a surprise that arrived 9 months after their summer wedding, a beautiful, healthy boy who'd inherited Jake's green eyes and Claire's stubborn determination. The children had been ecstatic about having a baby brother, especially Emma, who'd appointed herself head of baby supervision and took her duties very seriously. "Mama, baby James is trying to lift hay again," 6-year-old Emma called from the porch, her voice carrying that tone of long-suffering patience she'd perfected since becoming a big sister. "Should I tell Daddy he's being too optimistic?" "Let Daddy handle it," Claire called back, smiling as she watched Jake crouch down to James's level and demonstrate the proper technique for moving hay with hands that were still too small for the job. Even at 7 months old, James had shown signs of wanting to be wherever Jake was, doing whatever Jake was doing. The past year had been a whirlwind of changes. Marcus, now 16, had started his own small business restoring classic cars with Jake as his partner. They'd sold the Mustang at a car show for enough profit to buy 3 more project cars, and Marcus was already talking about expanding their operation after graduation. Sarah had won the Regional Junior Equestrian Championship and was being scouted by college riding programs. Tommy, at 9, had become the ranch's unofficial veterinarian assistant, helping Jake with everything from horse care to cattle health checks. Emma had started 1st grade with Mrs. Henderson and announced weekly that she was going to be a horse Dr. Princess teacher when she grew up, a career path that Jake assured her was absolutely achievable with enough dedication. Derek had visited twice since the custody hearing, both times staying at the guest house and spending quality time with the children without any drama or complications. He'd brought his new girlfriend, a kind woman named Rachel, who worked as a nurse and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know the kids. The visits had gone well enough that they'd tentatively planned another one for Christmas. "The Hendersons are here," Sarah announced, appearing in the kitchen doorway still wearing her riding clothes. At 14, she'd grown into a confident young woman who moved with the easy grace of someone completely comfortable in her own skin. Through the window, Claire could see their neighbor's truck pulling into the yard. Bill and Mary Henderson had become close friends over the past year, and their weekly barbecues had become a treasured tradition that usually lasted well into the evening. "Perfect timing," Claire said, checking the pot roast in the oven. "Can you help me get the table set up outside?" The dinner that followed was everything Claire loved about their life in Montana: good food, easy conversation, and the sound of children's laughter echoing across the ranch yard. Bill Henderson regaled them with stories from his latest fishing trip while Mary cooed over baby James and offered unsolicited but appreciated advice about teething. Marcus and Jake spent most of dinner explaining their latest restoration project to anyone who would listen, while Sarah described her plans for the upcoming state championship. Tommy had discovered a family of barn owls and was documenting their behavior with the scientific precision of a future wildlife biologist. Emma divided her attention between entertaining James and planning the elaborate birthday party she was convinced buckwheat needed, despite Jake's gentle explanations that horses didn't typically celebrate birthdays. As the sun set behind the mountains and the adults settled in with coffee while the children played in the yard, Claire found herself thinking about Derek's words from that day outside the courthouse. They looked good, happy. They were happy. All of them. Even Derek, from what she could tell, had found a measure of peace in his new relationship and his gradually improving connection with the children. It had taken time and patience, but they'd managed to create a situation where everyone could coexist without drama or resentment. "Penny for your thoughts," Jake said quietly, shifting baby James to one arm so he could reach for Claire's hand. "Just thinking about how far we've all come," Claire said. "A year and a half ago, I thought my life was ending. Now I can't imagine it being any different. No regrets?" Jake asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Only one," Claire said with a smile. "I regret that it took us so long to find each other." Jake lifted their joined hands and kissed her knuckles. "We found each other exactly when we were supposed to. Any earlier and we might not have been ready for all this." He gestured toward the yard where their children were engaged in what appeared to be a complex game involving horses, barn cats, and a jump rope. Marcus was patiently explaining the rules to Emma while Sarah helped Tommy retrieve a frisbee that had landed on the barn roof. James was watching everything with the intense focus of someone memorizing the chaos for future participation. "You know what I love most about our story?" Claire asked. "What's that?" Everyone said nobody wants a widow with 4 kids. They made it sound like a burden, like something that would scare away any reasonable man. Claire paused, watching Jake's face in the soft glow of the porch lights. "But you didn't see it as a burden. You saw it as exactly what you wanted." "I saw it as exactly what I needed," Jake corrected gently. 5 people who needed someone to love them completely and unconditionally. I'd been waiting my whole life to be that someone. From the yard, Emma's voice carried across the evening air. "Daddy Jake, can you teach James to ride buckwheat when he gets bigger?" "Absolutely," Jake called back. "But first, he has to learn to walk." "Details," Emma said dismissively, making the adults laugh. Later that evening, after the Hendersons had gone home and the children were settled for the night, Claire and Jake sat on the front porch swing with James sleeping peacefully between them. The baby had inherited his father's ability to sleep through anything, which was fortunate given the general noise level of the Morrison household. "Do you think we should have more kids?" Claire asked suddenly, surprising herself with the question. Jake looked at her with interest. "Do you want more kids?" "I don't know," Claire admitted. "I love our family exactly as it is. But there's something appealing about the idea of having children together from the beginning, you know, babies that are ours from the start." "James is ours from the start," Jake pointed out gently. "And so are Marcus and Sarah and Tommy and Emma. They became mine the day I decided I wanted to be their dad." "I know that," Claire said. "And I love that about you. I just meant ... "I know what you meant," Jake said, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "And if you want more babies, I'm all for it. But if you don't, I'm perfectly happy with the 5 we have. Our family is complete because we choose it to be complete, not because of any specific number." Claire smiled. 5, sometimes. I still can't believe you wanted all 5 of us." 6, Jake corrected, looking down at James. "And honestly, Claire, it was never a question of wanting. It was a question of needing. I needed all of you more than I knew how to explain." As if sensing he was being discussed, James stirred in his sleep and made the small, contented sound that never failed to melt Claire's heart. At 7 months old, he was already showing signs of Morrison's stubbornness. When he wanted something, he was remarkably persistent about getting it. "He's going to be trouble," Claire said fondly, smoothing the dark hair that stuck up at impossible angles no matter how much she tried to tame it. "All the best kids are trouble," Jake said. "Look at his siblings. Marcus was never trouble," Claire protested. "Angry, yes. Confused, definitely, but not trouble. Marcus rebuilt an entire engine in our garage without supervision last month," Jake pointed out. "If that's not trouble, I don't know what is." "That's industriousness," Claire corrected. "Completely different." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch cattle lowing in the distance, the soft nickering of horses in the paddock, the rustle of small creatures in the grass. It was a peaceful sound, the sound of a working ranch at rest. "Jake," Claire said eventually, "thank you." "For what?" "For seeing possibility where everyone else saw problems. For looking at my complicated life and saying yes instead of running away. For teaching my children that they're worth choosing, worth loving, worth fighting for." Jake was quiet for a moment. "Claire, you gave me something I'd given up hoping for. A family, a purpose. A reason to come home every night that had nothing to do with obligation and everything to do with joy. Even when Emma painted racing stripes on honey with washable markers? Especially then," Jake said solemnly. Although I still maintain that horse grooming should not involve art projects. And when Marcus decided to surprise us by completely rewiring the garage. That was actually helpful, Jake said. Terrifying but helpful. And when Sarah decided she wanted to train Buckwheat to jump. I have video of that, Jake said with a grin. It's going in their wedding slideshow someday. Claire laughed, thinking about how their children would react to that threat when they were older. You know they're all going to leave us eventually. College, careers, families of their own. Good, Jake said firmly. That's exactly what's supposed to happen. We're not raising them to stay with us forever. We're raising them to be capable, confident adults who know they're loved enough to take risks. And then it'll be just us again, Claire mused. You and me and whatever babies we might have. Just us and the horses and the cattle and the cats and whatever other strays we inevitably collect, Jake corrected. This ranch has a way of attracting things that need homes. Like me? Like all of us, Jake said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. We were all strays in our own way until we found each other. As the night deepened around them, Claire reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 2 years ago, she'd been convinced that her story was ending, that divorce meant failure, that being a single mother meant settling for less, that wanting more was selfish and unrealistic. She'd been wrong about all of it. Her story hadn't been ending, it had been beginning. The challenges hadn't been punishments. They'd been preparations for something better. The children hadn't been burdens that would drive love away. They'd been the very things that drew the right love to them. Jake Morrison had looked at her life, all the complexity and chaos and beautiful imperfection of it, and hadn't seen obstacles to overcome. He'd seen exactly what he wanted, exactly what he'd been missing, exactly what would make his own life complete. I love you, Claire said quietly, the words carrying all the gratitude and amazement and pure happiness she felt. I love you too. Jake replied, all of you, always. Above them, the Montana sky stretched endless and star-filled, full of promise and possibility. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new challenges, new moments of joy and chaos, and everything in between. But tonight, surrounded by the peace of the ranch and the warmth of her family, Claire Morrison knew that she was exactly where she belonged. The woman who'd once believed nobody wanted a widow with 4 kids had discovered something far better. Than being wanted, she'd found someone who needed them, who chose them, who looked at their complicated, beautiful life and said, this is exactly what I've been waiting for. And in choosing them, Jake had given them all something precious, the knowledge that they were enough, just as they were, just as they came, all 5 of them together. Sometimes the best love stories weren't about finding someone despite your complications, but because of them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.